When we ask, where should we begin? Most people immediately look for strategy. They want the 5 steps, the morning routine, the productivity system. But before any action plan, there is a more intimate starting point. Clarity. Not clarity about logistics, clarity about desire. Because not every dream is truly yours. Many of us carry ambitions that were inherited long before they were examined. They were shaped by family expectations, cultural definitions of success, social comparison, or even quiet competition. We absorbed ideas about what is impressive, what is respectable, what proves worth. So when someone says, "This is my dream," I often want to ask, is it? Or is it a well-rehearsed script? There is a difference between wanting something and wanting the validation attached to it, between desiring the work and desiring the status, between longing for the process and craving the applause. This is where we begin. If you build action on top of an unexamined dream, you may achieve it and still feel misaligned. You may reach the milestone and experience a strange emptiness. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded at something that was never truly yours. So the first step from dream to action is honesty. And honesty can be destabilizing. It requires you to sit with questions that don't have immediate, comfortable answers. If no one were watching, would I still want this? If this came without recognition, would it still feel meaningful? If this path required anonymity, would I continue? Strip away the image. Strip away the praise, strip away the comparison. What remains? Sometimes what remains is smaller than the original dream, quieter, less dramatic, but more alive. You might realize that what you truly want is not the prestigious title, but autonomy. Not the public platform, but creative expression. Not the high income, but stability and flexibility. Not the admiration, but impact. When you identify the desire beneath the dream, your energy changes, because now you are no longer chasing a symbol. You are moving toward an experience, and experiences are actionable in ways symbols are not. For example, if your deeper desire is autonomy, then action does not have to wait for a complete career overhaul. You can begin by increasing decision-making power in small ways. If your deeper desire is creative expression, you do not need immediate publication or perfection. You can begin by creating privately. When the core desire is clear, action becomes less intimidating. But clarity also requires confronting fear. Sometimes we attach ourselves to certain dreams because they are socially safe. They fit a recognizable narrative. They allow us to avoid more vulnerable longings. It can feel easier to pursue something prestigious than something deeply personal. Admitting that you want to write, to start over, to leave a stable role, to build something unconventional, these admissions expose you. They reveal longing, and longing is vulnerable, so we disguise it. We tell ourselves we are being practical. We delay, we rationalize, we gather more credentials, more preparation, more research. But often, beneath the delay, there is a quiet fear. What if I try and discover I'm not capable? What if I commit and lose stability? What if I choose differently and disappoint others? Clarity requires confronting these fears directly, not eliminating them, but naming them. Because unnamed fear becomes procrastination, named fear becomes a choice. Another layer of clarity involves differentiating desire from urgency. Some dreams are fueled by comparison. You see someone else succeeding and feel behind. You observe peers advancing and feel pressure to accelerate. Social media amplifies this urgency, creating the illusion that everyone is ahead of you. But urgency is not the same as alignment. A dream rooted in comparison will feel frantic. A dream rooted in authenticity will feel steady, even if it is ambitious. Steadiness does not mean certainty. It means coherence. The direction feels internally consistent, even if the path is unclear. And that internal coherence is what sustains action when motivation fluctuates. Because motivation always fluctuates. If your dream depends on excitement alone, it will collapse in the first season of doubt. But if it is anchored in genuine desire, if it reflects something meaningful to you, it can withstand difficulty. This is why we begin here. Before the plan, before the calendar, before the accountability system, we begin with the question, what do I truly want and why? Not the rehearsed answer, not the impressive answer, the honest one. And honesty may require silence. It may require stepping away from noise, from advice, from constant input. It may require tolerating temporary ambiguity while you untangle external expectations from internal desire. But this work is foundational because once your dream is clarified, once it reflects your values, your temperament, your longings, action becomes less about proving something and more about expressing something. And expression is sustainable. You do not burn out from pursuing what aligns. You burn out from performing what doesn't. So before you ask, what's the first step? Ask a deeper question. Whose dream am I carrying? If it is yours, you will feel both fear and vitality. If it is not, you will feel pressure and exhaustion. Where should we begin? Begin with truth. Because action built on clarity moves differently. And the most powerful momentum comes not from urgency, but from alignment. Once you have clarified the desire beneath the dream, something else quickly emerges: resistance. Not from the outside, at least not initially, from within. You begin to hear the familiar phrases: I'm not ready, it's not the right time, I need more experience, I'll start when things settle down. These statements sound responsible, rational, even wise, but often they are narratives of delay, and delay is seductive because it feels productive. You research, you prepare, you refine the idea, you imagine the perfect conditions under which you will finally begin. The problem is that perfect conditions are a fantasy of control. We tell ourselves we are waiting for clarity, when in reality we are waiting for certainty. And certainty rarely precedes action. More often, it follows it. Think about how many meaningful transitions in your life began before you felt fully prepared. A new job, a relationship, a move, a decision that changed your trajectory. If you had waited to feel entirely confident, you might still be waiting. Readiness is not a prerequisite for action. It is often a result of it. This is psychologically uncomfortable because it challenges the illusion that confidence comes first. We assume that once we believe in ourselves enough, we will begin. But confidence is built through evidence, and evidence is built through attempts. So we are caught in a loop, waiting to feel ready before we act, while readiness requires acting. To move from dream to action, you must interrupt this loop. You must question the story that postpones your beginning. Not all delay is fear, of course. Sometimes timing matters, resources matter, responsibilities matter. But there is a difference between strategic patience and avoidance disguised as prudence. Strategic patience is intentional. Avoidance is indefinite. Ask yourself, if nothing external changed, would I still be waiting 6 months from now? A year from now? If the answer is yes, the barrier may not be logistical. It may be emotional. What are you protecting yourself from? Failure, judgment, exposure, the possibility that the dream may not materialize as you imagined. Delay often protects us from discomfort more than from risk. There is also identity at stake. When a dream remains untested, it remains pure. It exists in potential. Once you act, it becomes vulnerable to feedback, critique, imperfection. As long as the idea stays in your head, it cannot disappoint you, but it also cannot change your life. This is the tension between imagination and reality. Imagination is safe. Reality requires courage. Interrupting the narrative of delay means shifting your relationship with imperfection. It means accepting that your first attempts will not reflect your ultimate capability. They will reflect your current level of experience, and that is enough. We are often paralyzed by the gap between where we are and where we want to be. We compare our beginning to someone else's middle. We expect our early steps to resemble mastery, but mastery is built on iterations, on visible, imperfect effort. Another narrative that fuels delay is the belief that starting small diminishes the dream. We think that if we cannot commit fully, quit the job, launch the company, write the entire book, then we should not start at all. This is an all-or-nothing mindset, and it keeps many dreams suspended indefinitely. Progress does not require dramatic upheaval. It requires consistent movement. You do not need to abandon stability to begin building something new. You need to carve out space for the first step, a conversation, a draft, a prototype, a course, a meeting. The dream does not need to be proven immediately. It needs to be tested. Testing transforms fantasy into data. You discover what excites you, what drains you, what skills need development, what assumptions were inaccurate. This information is invaluable, but it only emerges through action. Interrupting delay also requires confronting the internal critic. The voice that says, "Who do you think you are?" The voice that measures you against an invisible standard and finds you lacking. This voice often masquerades as realism, but realism without experimentation is limitation. You cannot accurately assess your potential without trying. And here is something subtle but powerful. When you act, even imperfectly, you shift your self-concept. You move from someone who wants to someone who does. That shift matters, because identity shapes behavior. When you see yourself as someone in motion, momentum builds. When you see yourself as someone perpetually preparing, hesitation becomes habitual. Action recalibrates identity. It tells your nervous system, we are capable of movement. It reduces the perceived magnitude of the leap because you are no longer standing still. And yes, there will be discomfort. You may feel exposed. You may feel behind. You may encounter resistance, internally and externally. But discomfort is not evidence that you should stop. It is often evidence that you are expanding. So if you find yourself waiting, ask gently but honestly, what am I actually waiting for? Permission, perfection, proof? Most of those will not arrive in advance. They arrive after you begin. From dream to action is not a leap of blind faith. It is a series of small interruptions to the story that says, later. And later is a seductive word. It preserves possibility without demanding courage. But possibility does not become reality through preservation. It becomes reality through participation. You do not need to feel completely ready. You need to be willing to begin before you are, because momentum is built in motion. And the most dangerous delay is not failure. It is postponing your own beginning. Now we arrive at the part no one posts about. The beginning is intoxicating. There is clarity, there is momentum, there is the quiet thrill of having finally started. Even the early steps carry energy because they feel new, but then comes the middle. The middle is where the dream loses its novelty, where progress is slower than expected, where effort is high and visible, results are low, where doubt becomes louder than inspiration. And this is where most dreams quietly dissolve. Not because they were unrealistic, not because the person lacked talent, but because they were unprepared for the emotional demands of the middle. The middle tests your relationship with discomfort. In the beginning, motivation carries you. In the middle, discipline must replace it. You begin to question yourself. Was this the right choice? Am I good enough? Is this worth it? The excitement that once felt expansive now feels heavy. There are days when nothing moves, when feedback is ambiguous, when the progress you imagined does not materialize on your timeline. This is not failure, it is process, but emotionally it can feel like stagnation. Resilience is not the absence of doubt, it is the ability to continue in its presence. We tend to assume that confident people do not struggle with uncertainty, that successful individuals are fueled by unwavering belief. But in reality, endurance is far more predictive than intensity. Intensity can spark a beginning. Endurance carries you through the middle. And endurance is built through emotional regulation. The same capacity we discussed earlier in other contexts. The ability to feel disappointment without catastrophizing it. To experience slow progress without interpreting it as inadequacy. To tolerate comparison without abandoning your own path. The middle often exposes our hidden expectations. We expect growth to be linear. We expect effort to be immediately rewarded. We expect clarity to increase steadily. But growth is cyclical. There are expansions and contractions. There are seasons of visible advancement and seasons of invisible consolidation. In those quieter seasons, it may appear as though nothing is happening. But internally, skills are integrating, identity is stabilizing, capacity is strengthening. The danger is misinterpreting quiet as failure. This is where self-trust becomes essential again. Can you trust that meaningful work takes time? Can you remain loyal to the process even when external validation is minimal? The middle is also where comparison becomes most seductive. You look around and see others accelerating, publishing, launching, advancing. It can create a false urgency, a sense that you are behind. But every trajectory is shaped by variables you cannot see, different timelines, different resources, different responsibilities. different histories. Comparison distorts context. Resilience requires narrowing your focus. Instead of asking, "Am I ahead or behind?" ask, "Am I consistent?" Consistency is measurable. Comparison is infinite. Another emotional challenge of the middle is boredom. Yes, boredom, because repetition is not glamorous. Practicing the same skill, showing up week after week, refining, adjusting, trying again. The brain craves novelty. It wants a new idea, a new direction, a new spark, and sometimes we abandon progress not because it isn't working, but because it is no longer exciting. But mastery lives in repetition, the ability to tolerate the ordinary days, the days without applause, without breakthroughs, is what separates dreamers from builders. This does not mean you ignore misalignment. Sometimes the middle reveals that the dream itself needs recalibration. But there is a difference between thoughtful adjustment and reactive escape. Resilience asks you to discern between the two. Are you pivoting because you've learned something meaningful, or because discomfort is asking for relief? The middle also invites a deeper shift, redefining success. If success is measured only by outcome, the middle will always feel insufficient. But if success is measured by engagement, by showing up, by learning, by expanding, then even slow seasons contain value. You begin to appreciate the internal changes, increased confidence, greater clarity, stronger boundaries, sharper skill. These may not be externally visible yet, but they are foundational. And here is something profound. The middle is where identity solidifies. In the beginning, you are experimenting with a new version of yourself. In the middle, you become it. You are no longer someone trying to build something. You are someone who builds, even when it is difficult. That identity shift cannot happen without sustained effort. So when you find yourself in the middle, tired, questioning, tempted to abandon, pause. Do not interpret discomfort as a sign to quit. Interpret it as evidence that you are beyond the fantasy stage and inside the work. The dream becomes real not when it is announced, not when it is imagined, but when it is sustained. And sustaining requires resilience. It requires you to say, "This matters," even when motivation fades. To say, "I will continue," even when progress is incremental. To say, "I trust the process," even when the outcome is uncertain. Where should we begin? With clarity, with action, with specificity, but we continue with endurance, because dreams are not built on bursts of inspiration. They are built on the quiet decision to remain committed, especially in the middle. And if you can stay in the middle long enough, what once felt distant becomes inevitable. Not because it was easy, but because you refused to walk away. So instead of asking, "How do I achieve this?" ask a smaller question. What does participation look like this week? This week. Not 5 years from now. Not after you've mastered everything. Specificity reduces intimidation. If you want to write a book, perhaps participation is 500 words. If you want to change careers, perhaps participation is one informational conversation. If you want to improve your health, perhaps participation is one scheduled walk. These steps may feel almost embarrassingly small compared to the size of the dream. But small steps have two crucial psychological effects. First, they build evidence. You move from imagining yourself as someone who might act to experiencing yourself as someone who does act. That evidence recalibrates identity. Second, they build momentum. Momentum is not born from intensity, it is born from consistency. We often romanticize big beginnings, the dramatic launch, the overnight transformation, but sustainable change is rarely dramatic, it is repetitive. There is also something deeply humbling about specificity. It forces you to confront the gap between fantasy and reality. In fantasy, you are fluent, confident, accomplished. In reality, you are learning, you are awkward, you are adjusting, and this is where imperfection becomes essential. If you wait to take action until you can execute it flawlessly, you will remain in preparation indefinitely. Perfectionism is often a disguised form of self-protection. It says, "If I cannot do this exceptionally, I will not do it at all." But excellence is a byproduct of repetition, not a prerequisite for starting. So allow your early steps to be imperfect. Allow your first attempts to be unpolished. Allow yourself to be a beginner, even if you are accomplished in other areas of your life. There is a psychological reset that happens when you permit yourself to be inexperienced. It softens the ego's demand to perform and reorients you toward growth. Another critical piece of translating vision into action is constraint. It is tempting to overhaul everything at once, to redesign your entire schedule, restructure your entire life. But transformation rarely requires chaos. It requires allocation. Where in your current life can you carve out protected space for this dream? Time is not found, it is designated. Energy is not infinite, it is directed. If something matters, it must occupy visible space in your calendar, not just in your imagination. This is where discipline enters, not as punishment, but as devotion. Devotion is sustained attention over time. When you show up consistently, even in small ways, you are communicating to yourself that this dream is not optional. It is integrated, and integration changes how you relate to it. It stops being a distant aspiration and becomes part of your identity. You are no longer someone who wants to write. You are someone who writes, even if only for 30 minutes a day. You are no longer someone who hopes to change careers. You are someone actively exploring alternatives. This identity shift reduces internal friction. Because behavior reinforces belief, there will still be doubt. There will still be days when motivation dips. But specificity provides clarity during those moments. Instead of asking, "Do I feel inspired?" you ask, "Did I show up?" And showing up is measurable. It is also important to recognize that specific action will generate feedback. Some of it encouraging, some of it uncomfortable. This is valuable. Feedback refines direction. It teaches you what works, what resonates, what requires adjustment. Without action, you remain in abstraction. With action, you enter dialogue with reality. And reality, while imperfect, is informative. There is a quiet power in becoming someone who consistently takes small steps toward what matters. It builds self-respect, because you are no longer negotiating endlessly with your own potential. You are engaging it. So when you think about your dream, resist the temptation to stay in inspiration. Ask yourself, what does this look like in behavior? What can I do this week that moves me 1 inch closer? Not dramatically, not flawlessly, deliberately. Dreams become tangible not when they are announced, but when they are scheduled. And the bridge between who you are and who you want to become is not built in leaps. It is built in steps, one specific, imperfect step at a time.